If you're in marketing, creating content it's undoubtedly part of your job, and creating that content takes a lot of time. If you're smart, you're going to repurpose that content. You're going to use it on all the platforms: social media, YouTube, email marketing, your website, print, maybe, I don't know. If you spent the time to create something that is worth sharing, you got to get it out there any way and every way possible. That is the most efficient way. And time is money, and it's part of what drives our industry. So today on the Frustrated by Your Marketing podcast, we're going to talk about how to repurpose that content, how to get it out there, and how to get the most out of your creative. I'm your host, Jim DeMicco, and today I'm joined by my guest, Cody Schneider. He happens to know a lot about this topic. He is the co-founder and CEO of Swell AI. That's what they do. They turn audio and video, they turn it into clips for YouTube Shorts, they turn it into clips for TikTok and Twitter and blog posts and newsletters and LinkedIn posts. They do it all. So we're going to talk about that. But at the beginning of the conversation, and what I'll do, if you're here just for repurposing, I'll put a link to when we start talking about that. But at the beginning, I want to talk a little bit to Cody about OpenAI Sora, the text-to-video generator that came out last week. When you're hearing this, probably a few weeks ago. And I feel like it'd be good to talk to Cody about it because he's the one who told me about it first. We were doing our intro call last week and he mentioned it and I hadn't heard about it. I almost feel like he told me about Skynet for the first time. I'm an optimist. I've not been nervous or worried at all about ChatGPT or Bard or DALL-E or Midjourney. All of these, they were going to be great tools and we're all going to use them and it wasn't going to change things too much. I'm a little, I don't want to say worried, but I'm a little concerned now. This out of the box it's insane. The ripple effects it's going to have on the creator economy is going to be big. So we'll talk about that first. And then, like I said, we'll have a link to when we launch into content repurposing, although there might be a little bit of both. So welcome, Cody. Thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Jim, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. And really appreciate you hosting.
Oh, you're welcome. So thanks for being the one to tell me. I feel like, people remember the first time they heard about, big events in the world and totally. You're going to be part of that story for me. I have a feeling that this is different. I don't know if you agree, but
I mean, I think it's the first really usable version of video, and everybody's seen AI image generation, and that's kind of this interesting thing, and a lot of people, their first interaction with like AI photos is they get a headshot made by the company they're working at. We're seeing that more and more where it's like, oh, rather than hire a photographer, we use a tool like Headshot AI or something like that. But this is kind of the first big, I feel like, kind of base level technology change for a lot of people where they're going to be like, oh, I just saw something that was entirely AI generated that looks photorealistic. It looks, kind of Hollywood grade level from a video and standpoint. But anyway.
Yeah, I think so. To me, what the scary part is, so the stock photo industry was already in jeopardy, right? So the fact that, and I've already used it. So, we have clients that, the power was out and they're a bar. And so I went into ChatGPT that runs DALL-E and I said, throw me a picture of beer on a bar with some candles in the background, and I didn't have to, I don't even know if that exists in stock photos, but it would have been hard to find. I've got subscriptions to all different ones, but I was able to get exactly what I wanted. It looked really cool in 2 minutes. So that industry was already in jeopardy, but that affects that one person, right? So that one photographer, and not that they're not amazing photographers, but they're churning stuff out, right? When I see these videos, this is production crews. It's not one, it's entire industries. It's the drone pilot. It's in the case of, there's one of a woman walking down a Tokyo street. I mean, you'd have to have lighting people. You'd have to have people blocking off the streets. I mean, it's more than an individual creator. This is affecting, and hundreds of hours versus tens of hours of time is being replaced.
100%.
So it's scarier there. And the fact that it's that good scares me because what's coming next for photos and what's coming next for all of the, for text and for all of those things, if it's leaps and bounds ahead of where it was a year ago. And it's much faster than I expected to see it, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. And just for context for the listener too, like I think just to give a high level what Sora is. So it's basically AI model that OpenAI has released, what they have trained on is all of this publicly available media data. But the kind of the magic that they've created is traditionally when they were doing AI video, it was frame by frame. So it was still multiple one-dimensional images that were built on top of each other. From the white papers I read that are talking about this kind of new technology, what they're actually doing is creating almost a three-dimensional space that these entities are interacting with. So again, that woman walking down the street when she's in Tokyo or whatever, there's actually like these digital objects that are created with this. And how it's different than like a game engine or the rendering, it's not doing this fixed point. It's actually time is a variable within that space. And so that's why it can create this almost, it looks, again, I mean, we keep talking internally, like we are of the opinion by the end of the year, you're going to have a full length film, like a feature length film that is entirely AI generated, both from the visuals that are actually created, and then also the script that's written and the voices that are voicing the characters. That whole thing is possible now. It's getting incredibly powerful. And what even gets more scary with all this is that they're starting to do very high quality. I just saw a demo yesterday where they basically took the conversation between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. They translated Putin's his what he said in Russian to English. And then they did basically lip matching with him speaking the English version of that. So the conversation is looks like it's them talking in English back and forth to each other with the content that's, or with the whatever the translation of Vladimir Putin's thing is. So two things there, super interesting from you can, from the distribution of media. Simultaneously, there's going to be so much disinformation that could come from that. But again, just to circle back around to the Sora piece, I think what we're starting to see companies that specialize in 3D animation, especially feature films. Think Disney, think Pixar, think DreamWorks, et cetera. And the executives there are coming out and saying hey, 80% of our workflows are going to be automated entirely by AI in the next 3 years is what they're projecting. In reality, it'll probably be more time. I'm guessing 6 to 9. But what they're really looking at is all of these kind of entry level positions that previously, they had recent grads do, et cetera. They're going to be just entirely kind of that grunt work is going to be handled by the AI. And then these specialists are going to be the ones that are kind of doing those really high touch, more intricate parts of the animation process. And I think that actually brings to the high, the larger thing that's happening here, where a lot of these AI tools, they're kind of eroding the entry level positions and taking over those jobs. We see this in programming a lot in particular, where AI is really good at writing kind of junior level code is what we call it. And I think it's going to be the same thing on the marketing side. Those junior level job roles are going to be augmented in a way, and your expertise is going to become more and more valuable, your deep expertise. So anyways, not to digress a ton there, but I think it's all
you're right.
Connected in ways.
You're right. And so, again, I've been thinking about this, I don't want to say nonstop over the last week, but a lot. And I keep going from positive to negative feelings about it. And so one of the positives one of the negatives you just touched on, I had the same feeling about ChatGPT, which is if you don't learn how to write yourself and you don't get that entry level job, how are you going to be able to manage the AI later? So that makes me nervous. The positive thing I have is the economy, especially the creator economy, is going to move towards directors, let's say. So someone who has a vision, someone who has a story. And it's cool to think that a kid in high school who has a really cool story to tell, before, yes, there are some breakout stories of kids. They get the camera, they do the filming, they spent their whole summer vacation doing it, but they're going to be able to tell that story in a matter of hours or days or however long it takes them to iterate on that, and it will be studio quality, eventually.
100%.
That's 100%. Really cool that this more story, so that's a positive, more, there'll be more. The negative, the other negative is there's going to be a lot of content.
100%.
these drone pilots are not going to be drone piloting anymore, but they're probably going to do something in creative, or they're going to be doing very, very niche specific drone piloting. So they're going to be creating different content. They might not be creating content for something. They might be creating content for something of, for someone else. Maybe it's for themselves or for passion projects. So, there's the good and bad of that, I guess, to see people on both sides. But yeah, if you're not creating something super niche, super specific, very, very localized, you should move in that direction. Anything general is in jeopardy right now. And if you're not a producer, like if you're not creating a story, if you're like a cog in the wheel, you're in jeopardy too, I'd say.
I totally agree. And I think to put where does this take effect fastest, right? Because we say by end of the year there'll be a feature film. It'll still be like kind of shoddy quality, right? It'll exist, but it will be like it'll be all right. But where I could see this like really taking effect super quickly is like, for example, like TV commercials, right? Where it's just like stock footage of cars driving, or like your average American family for a bank, right? Like instead of having to go out and hire these actors to come and do these commercials, like they're just going to be able to generate these, right? At hundreds of the cost that they were previously. Right. And so I think it's going to you're going to see in the next, again, I would say in the next 12 months, these agencies that spin up, and they are, like commercial production agencies for TV, but they don't do anything that a traditional like production company would. They don't hire talent. They don't coordinate sets. They don't do any of this. Like literally their entire jobs is just designers that sit behind screens and basically create these storyboards and guide these, commercials from that without interacting, and so I think that is going to be like the places that we see this being adopted most quickly is, again, to your point, like kind of these commodity type activities. They provide value to the brand, but they're not like, it's not going to be this like custom thing. It's going to be something that's just more of a general knowledge. But from that, I mean, and again, if you're just listening to this and just like hearing about Sora, go look up some of the animation stuff they're doing. It's the most crazy thing I've ever seen. You can get basically any animation style that like you're imagining. And the wild part too is that the founder of or one of the co-founders of OpenAI, Sam Altman, he's been just like on Twitter, like answering people's requests. So it's not like this takes hours to produce a 60-second video. Like it's taking minutes, right? So, and that's the limitation from my understanding right now is like you can only do about 50 to 60 seconds. And we have some friends that work at OpenAI. So based off of like what we're hearing from them, it just takes a lot of compute to do this. So the actual limitation right now is the amount of processing that we have available to even be able to like generate this content. So like, if we go and we try to one shot a 2-hour, video right now, it's just like physically impossible to do that is kind of the idea. Right. But we can do these 60-second ones, and it will get like more and more efficient as more time, as time goes down, and we get better with our compute and better with the kind of the efficiency of the algorithms that we're using for this stuff. So,
right, and then what other things that are coming is the ability for you to bring in your lousy footage or your great photo, and build it that way. So totally. There's not going to be drone footage of, I work with a retirement community in Connecticut, and we've done drone footage for them. That's not coming to AI anytime soon of that very niche specific place. But I could upload my drone footage and say, improve this. Totally. And it could say, all the little tricks and flying through trees that I don't do and my brother doesn't do because we're nervous we're going to, crash the drone, and the AI won't worry about it. It'll have no problem adding that. So in addition to starting from scratch, it'll, I can see there being just like, finish this up.
Upscale this. Totally.
So it's just going to be interesting to watch. I think, again, I think that, like you said, new industry or, new creative firms popping up. If you're a current creative firm, I think, the thing I'm most personally worried about is burnout. Because of what I think is going to happen is there's going to be an expectation of managing more. And so what's really nice in the knowledge economy is when you have some of that easy work. And I think a lot of that easy work is going to be gone. So if you were staging a shoot, part of it is standing around waiting for stages to get set up, and or at least or even having a day out of the office to do that. Now it's going to be moving from completed commercial to completed commercial to completed commercial, and our brains are fry a little bit. I think just not being able to take that down. There's no downtime. We don't have to wait. Oh, I'll send this to creative. I'll get it back in 2 days. Those days are gone. Creative gets back to you in an hour, or gets back to you in seconds.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So the fact that you can do all the iterations will go faster. Everything will move faster, but our minds are going to have to move faster too. So that's my personal fear.
No, I think that's something to be conscientious of. And what I'm most curious to see what happens is like how companies adopt. And I don't know, man. Like, again, I live in a bubble. So like AI to me is like, everybody I know is working on it. All I talk about, all I say is it because I'm building a company in this space. But, I go home for the holidays and I talk to my uncle, and it's like, he knows nothing about it and it doesn't even exist. So like, I have to remind myself that like in reality, the majority of people haven't even interacted or like know what it is or how it functions or any of these components. So I think it's just going to slowly creep into kind of everybody's life. But I do think that like from a business owner standpoint right now, you have this huge opportunity to deploy it as a tool to automate as much of the processes that you're already doing. Right. And I think that's like the overarching conversation I'm having with all this stuff. And like, we'll talk about like Sora is a great example of this, where you're basically like, oh yeah, you go do this video shoot and do all this, like script writing and it like, okay, now we can, that the video like filming process and getting like that is now like augmented in a way. But there's still other parts of that process that like are the conceptual design, the final pieces. What I keep telling people is, hey, AI is really good at doing that 80% of the middle. That's all the heavy lifting. But like where the humans truly shine is kind of the beginning stage of like the ideation, and then that ending stage of like, okay, how do I make that those magic moments that kind of tie this all together? And that's how I see this kind of universally being used, in the near future, like next 3 to 5 years. After that, I have no idea. Like, and again, this is all speculation. Yeah. I mean, GPT-5 could come out tomorrow and it's like, it's semi-sentient. Who knows? I'm not sure. But I think with all this, it's just moving so quickly that nobody really knows what's going to happen. So. Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to watch. So again, and thank you for telling me. You're part of my story. I have a feeling that this is when I started really paying. Not that I've been paying very close attention to AI, but this is when I started paying attention in a different way.
Totally.
And so it's we'll see where it goes. I think a lot of great's going to come from it. I think in this case, some bad is going to come from it, and by that I mean more jobs lost too quickly to replace easily.
I think there's definitely going to be a kind of. With every technological change, there's always that transition period. New jobs end up getting created, like, historically looking at like the economic kind of ebb and flow. But I agree. I think it's just going to be like at a pace that people aren't prepared for. Like, I'm even like mentally understanding how fast this is all moving. And again, I work in this and this is what I do. But I do think with this, it's going to create there's already new like roles that I'm seeing spring up the companies. So like one of them is called an automations engineer. So this like role did not exist 2 years ago, but basically their job is to audit the systems that are in place at companies and just like do whatever they can to basically automate as much of those processes as possible. My friend Grant is like one of these. I think his title is head of automation engineering, but he works at a startup company. And basically what he does is he like airdrops into like teams at the company. He like, audits their entire processes. And he's like, cool, like I can automate this 40% of what you're doing right now. And then he builds out, with like super simple tools like Zapier and Airtable and like ChatGPT, basically builds out these automation workflows that automate that kind of deleterious task, whatever that is. A lot of the time it's ends up being like some type of like paperwork or like admin task. But for like, I think these new roles are just going to naturally come up with this technology. What those are going to be, I have no idea. The pace that they crop up in comparison to like these other jobs getting replaced. But I think for anybody that's listening, that's like, freaking out about this, the opportunity right now is that there's this arbitrage that's going to exist for the next like 5 years. But if you just adopt this and start even just in small percentages, use this in your workflows, like even 10%, right? You're going to be so much further ahead of these other companies, your competitors, just because they're not thinking about it, they're not experimenting with it. And by just having like even just that small touch, you can create these efficiencies. And we're seeing this in the agency space in particular. So like a lot of the clients that live on Swell, they do like media production for other companies. And for them, like they basically, say they have a staff of 10 people, they start using us. Suddenly they can either like take their staff down to 2 people, or they can have those 10 people work like they're 40, but they're still charging their customers the same price, right? So it's like, oh, I just 4x my output, but we're getting paid the same amount. But to the user, like, because again, we're in this arbitrage moment where like they don't realize the value of what they're getting yet. Like they don't realize that it's actually getting produced way cheaper than it was previously. The business owner can basically take that margin and it just turns into more profit for their business. So again, just these opportunities that we're seeing arise based off of what's happening in the market currently. Absolutely.
And that's a great segue into the main topic of this podcast. I know we talked for 20 minutes or so on Sora, and thanks for the diversion with me, because I needed to do that. I needed to talk about it.
I love it.
But let's talk about repurposing. So Swell AI, that's your company. You're in AI like that. So that, it makes sense that we talked a little bit about it in another capacity. But what you do, like you just said, is and if you go back to the intro where I said this, is everybody's creating. If you're in marketing, you're creating content, right? That's literally the business on some form or fashion, or you're just a numbers person, which is analyzing the content. But by and large, you're creating or organizing, or has something to do with content. So the content exists. In the case of my company, it's the podcast, right? So I create this podcast. I have 45 minutes to an hour of my conversation with Cody, and I post that onto podcast networks, and I post that onto YouTube. And then if I'm not smart, I stop. If I'm smart, I use it in more ways, and I am not using it as many ways as I should because of time. And I've been playing around with tools. I haven't played with Swell AI yet. It's on my list. I have checked out the site, and you've got a very interesting space that you're in, because you're doing all the things that a lot of your competitors are doing, but in one umbrella, which is really, really nice. Because obviously I can drop my show or my transcript into ChatGPT and say, write me some show notes, and I can, use whatever software to get clips, and I can do whatever for a blog, or, but yours is one-stop shopping, I guess, if I'm seeing it right. So what you're going to do is you're going to help me produce more by producing less, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And just for the, to zoom out to like a 40,000 foot view and kind of talk about like, what are we even trying to do here, right? Like when we do content marketing, like what we're really trying to do is create workflows, right? Like what are repeatable things that we can do over and over again to get in front of our target audience that we know is like going to make a purchase decision or buy a product or service in the future. Traditionally, like what I see a lot of companies struggle on is they try to do too many things at once, or they do something one time and then they don't see a result, and so they stop that thing. And so my call to action, like if you're listening to this, like the framework to think about this with, it's like, hey, what are the things that I can do for the next 5 years, every day, every week, every month, whatever that time, that time frame is. But that will help me grow my business. So again, to use this podcast as an example for you guys, like what we can see, like a lot of companies do, is they say, hey, I sit down with some type of industry expert on a weekly basis, just like what we're doing here. I make this long form piece of content. But that long form piece of content, when I chop that up into different formats, I suddenly have content for every channel that I'm trying to do marketing on, right? So say, for example, I'm trying to publish to a blog, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, like I'm trying to write a newsletter, do like tweets, LinkedIn posts, anywhere that your target customer is, you can take that video content, that long form video content, and you can basically repurpose it into those formats. And that's really like what we're trying to do at Swell is, okay, how do we create these templated outputs that you are trying to create? And I can just give it this raw source material, and then it creates those outputs. And the analogy I've been using more and more is like, thinking about it almost is like, we're taking crude oil and we're turning it into plastics and gasoline and diesel and aggregate, whatever these other output forms are that we can create out of that. But from a founder standpoint, right? Like say you're a business owner, the mental energy that's required to do this is way less than if I had to go to each of those channels and produce, unique pieces of content for every one of those channels. Like that would be a full-time job, right? And like you're managing people, you're managing your financials. There's only so much time in the day, but if you're just focusing on like, hey, I'm going to sit down for 1 hour a week and talk to somebody, and then maybe it's an hour of post-production that is required of me to make all the content I need for all of those channels. Suddenly that becomes a way more manageable task that you can do on that daily, or weekly basis. And so that's really the thing that I'm obsessed with right now with AI. Like, and I used to do this at companies, right? So like my background is an early stage startups. I was out in, Silicon Valley and did this whole thing. And at these companies, like what we focused on was like, hey, we're going to build all these processes to do content production, but I needed a team of 15 to 20 people, right? And so it was just, you're talking about massive resource allocation to be able to talk about this output. That same 15 to 20 people that I needed before, I can now do that as an individual now in about 2 hours of time. Like it's crazy to think about like how much, leverage we now have with these tools when we think about them in our processes. So again, just kind of like want to frame this conversation of like how to think about using these AI tools, especially on the content production side. Because there's the things that used to and just to give scale, like if I wanted to go get a SEO written blog post about a podcast before, if I wanted to go get that written again, even like 3 years ago, that would cost me about $100, right, to get a good like written article. I can write that same blog post right now for 20 cents. So am I going to spend 20 cents or am I going to spend $100? Like, of course I'm going to spend 20 cents. And again, that's just kind of the monetary change that we're seeing that's affecting the market currently.
So let's go over a little bit about how the process works. So you run from our conversation last week, you run your AI. It's sort of using ChatGPT as your engine right now. That might change in the future. And it really doesn't really matter because you just need a language model behind it, right? So your software sitting on top of that. If I were to upload my video, you're analyzing the video you're running a transcript yourself, right? Obviously. So you're
yeah, I can run through that whole thing. Would that be valuable? I'm happy to do it.
So just run me through like creating the transcript and then, where the pieces are coming from, I guess.
Yeah. Perfect. So what we do is you upload an MP4, so you upload that video file. This conversation, we could do this exact thing. So the AI, we trained an AI model to create a transcript of the conversation. It does speaker identification. That transcript can be shared publicly. But the biggest thing is that all of the words are word by word timestamped. So what that means is that every word has a moment in time within that transcript that we can reference back to. What this allows for is that we can then create clips based off of that transcript. So we made this AI that does transcription, and then we made another AI that does clip identification. So it just automatically finds clips within that transcript. The AI that we
and
built,
so is that does, so can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah,
so when it's creating those clips, is it based off of an algorithm or an AI of what is potentially going to go viral?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So basically what we look for is we use what it's called like entity identification. So it looks for like an idea within a transcript. Okay. And then it clips based off that idea. And we give parameters. We're like, hey, it needs to be under 60 seconds. It needs to be under it needs to be 2 to 5 minutes long. It needs to be 10 minutes plus, et cetera. We can do kind of all of that. But those clips that it makes, it like takes like really what it's looking for is like a hook that like hooks the listener, and then some type of insight that follows that hook. And so identifies those. So we just make like a ton of them, for people so that they can go through and pick out the ones that they like. They can export those right out of there. They can also just make clips right out of the transcript by highlighting a section. And again, because it's timestamped word by word, we can just like clip right from that transcript. So like say you started at word 1 of sentence 1 and you ended at the final word of sentence 3. We can make a whole clip, like a video clip, off of the words of that transcript. So kind of a couple different ways to do that. And then out of the box, like we built these templates that are AI generated content that's based off of that transcript. So what does that mean? Let's just break that down. So we basically take the transcript that we had the AI write for people, and we put it into the context window of the AI. So a context window is basically like what it knows it exists. Think about it as almost like, here's this walled garden of information that you're allowed to like interact with. You're going to use your general knowledge to interact with that walled garden of information that we provided you.
Okay.
But what we can do then is we can build templates like, for example, podcast show notes, where it's like titles, summaries, timestamps with key takeaways, entities that are mentioned, websites that are mentioned, give me a guest file, anything that could be packaged in that transcript, we can pull that out. And those can be saved as templates that are reused in the future. So the way that I talk about it, like, and a lot of the times I get the question like, well, how is this different than ChatGPT? I could do the exact same thing. 100% you could. What we are really trying to do is say, hey, like the chat that you're having with ChatGPT to get the output that you're looking for. I don't think anybody wants to chat with an AI every time they're trying to get that output. Chat is a great sandbox to figure out what I'm trying to get the AI to do. But once I figure that out, I just want a template that I can reuse over and over again whenever I provide those raw materials. So again, it can do show notes. It can do email newsletters. You can provide it like an email newsletter that you wrote previously about your podcast as an example, or your interview or whatever that is. You can provide that as a template. You just tell the AI, hey, write an email newsletter formatted and stylized like the following, but about this episode. And we'll go and do that. And again, that can be saved as something to use in the future. Do that for tweets, LinkedIn posts, full-length blog posts written in the first person. You can also, we just launched this recently, but we call it brand voice. So brand voice is basically requirements for the AI to write in tone, style, and voice.
Okay.
You can define that, and then really why. So I think for a lot of people, when they're initially interacting with AI, they're like, this is so like robotic. It doesn't feel human. And so I just to talk about that a little. Yeah, exactly. And so to talk about that too, like the AIs are trained off of like the general knowledge of the internet, right? And when you think about the internet, like there's a lot of terrible stuff out there, like really low quality, right? So It's going to be very average in its writing style. So unless we give it examples or have it, like define, hey, this is what, is good. Like it's not going to write in that capacity. And so that brand voice is like a simple way to do this. Where we're going with this further is you're going to actually be able to like upload your previously written blog post as an example. And we'll then fine tune the AI writer based off of that tone, style, and voice of all that previous content. And then it can write in that tone, style, and voice for all of your future content. And so this is this way that you can even get like further down, more on brand with all this. And just another thing to piggyback on top of this, like I think for companies that are starting to implement AI within their teams, a challenge they're all facing is like, how do I have 10 people working with these tools. How do I make the outputs from all 10 people that are interacting with these tools sound the same? So what we're suggesting and seeing companies do is basically defining like, hey, here's the prompts that we use to interact with the AI that create the tone, style, and the voice that we are looking for so that it's uniform across outputs, even if other people are writing it, right? And marketing, we've been doing this forever, right? Like we have style guides, like here's the fonts we use and the colors, and here's how you use the logo, here's how you don't use the logo, et cetera. It's just that same idea, but we're just applying it to, okay, here's these AI tools, here's the prompts that we use to interact with them, here's that style guide, that brand voice that we use to interact with those AI tools. So yeah, just brain dumping the things that I know I've seen really impact business owners.
No, that's great. So essentially, but I think I saw on the website that you can, as an agency, you can have sort of different buckets by client. But if in my case, if it was just for this podcast, I'm training Swell on my tone,
Exactly.
my expectations, my whatever. And then after using it for a few times, all I literally have to do is drop in that MP4 and walk away, and then wait for the magic to happen. I don't have to re-talk to it anymore. At that point, it's just
exactly. Yeah. I mean, so really what I'm obsessed with this is, and like our core thesis is like, we think that like a company is going to be able to market itself really soon. What does that even mean? So like, let's do a small version of this. So I have a friend, he has a blog, and he basically hooked up an AI writer that goes and it finds keywords that are related to his niche. He's in the health space, and it goes and it writes content based off of those keywords, and then it publishes it. And then it looks at the Google Analytics and the Search Console data. And then based off of that data, it just writes more and more content. Wow. So this blog is kind of just like proliferating itself, right? And this is just an experiment that he's doing to see what happens, because we're all kind of curious with this type of stuff.
So he's not editing it.
Yeah, he's not editing. He's just like, let's just publish AI content and see what happens, right?
Wow, that's so cool.
So like, I mean, I just saw some of the data, and he's doing like 2,800 clicks a day already. It's like about 12 months old, the whole project. He's written like 25,000 articles, or that AI has like written 25,000 articles that is just like publishing these. But that same idea can be applied to what we're doing. So we take this video, we upload it into Swell. It automatically creates these clips. We're building this right now, but it will basically like, it'll do facial recognition to see who's talking, and like then we can basically change the aspect ratio of the clip output, so we can get both portrait and landscape depending on which channel that we're putting that clip to. So for example, like on YouTube Shorts, portrait performs better than landscape does.
Right.
And so it'll automatically do that. It create that clip. It automatically changes it so that it's in the vertical format. And then we're building in social scheduling so that you'll, like in the near future, be able to schedule your clips right to your social media channels within Swell. But what this turns into is then once we have that all connected, we can just publish a ton of content, and we can pull back the data from the social channels, and we can see, hey, clips like this are performing really well on TikTok. Let's take those transcripts of the top performers, and let's go find more content similar like this in our back catalog, our content library.
Oh, wow.
So then the AI goes back, and it can go and it can find more clips.
This might do really well. It
produces those clips, and it schedules them, and suddenly we have this growth flywheel, right? So again, this is like where we see all of this going, all of these tools heading, is you're like, as a marketer, your role is going to be really focused on, okay, what are good inputs, and like what are happening in the real world? How can I provide that to the AI? And then how do I create these workflows for the AI to go and basically like do all the heavy lifting part of its job, like our jobs, the tasks we're trying to complete, and then just letting that data flow back in that influences. And it's nothing new, right? Like we've been doing this exact same process. Like good marketing has been doing this for the last 20 years, right? It's like do things, look at the data, like eliminate the things that are not doing well, do more of the things that are doing good. And then you just keep doing that over and over again. And that's how you create growth for a company. We're just taking that same process and just augmenting as much of those steps with AI as possible is how we're thinking about it. So
that's great. And then So again, you've uploaded it. It's kicking back out the blog. It's kicking back out social, just text. So just a LinkedIn post. It's kicking back out obviously the clips. Is it kicking out? Like I know on your LinkedIn, you've been posting a lot of LinkedIn carousels. Is that through Swell AI?
No, that isn't through Swell. That is AI automated though.
It is AI. Okay, interesting. So
yeah.
So it's not kicking out. Can it kick out an image?
It can't kick out an image yet. This is like where we're headed.
Okay. Not that that's as important, but okay. So
yeah. But like something people have asked for is audiograms. So it's like basically instead of having it to be a how do I say this? Like say a lot of podcasters still aren't doing video, right? I would strongly suggest it, but they're still just doing audio. So what they do is they make it's like a headshot of whoever the host is or whoever the guest is. And then they have like captions that come up on the screen, and then some type of like audio wave that's moving, and then they use that on Instagram as their social content. So like that's an like easy one for us to build. The LinkedIn carousel is totally capable as well, where it's like, hey, we can build these templates, and then you can say like basically like we can automatically generate LinkedIn carousels based off of the key takeaways from the episode. Like that is totally possible. It's just like,
it's on the
our
list.
Challenge is that, there's so much we can build. It's like our biggest thing is like, there's so much noise out there. Like, how do we find the signals through all of this and like build just the things that people want? But like carousels is a no brainer. We're going to definitely do that. We are really just like kind of the biggest challenge is that a lot of people are trying to build their own templates in Canva and then like connect them into like us basically. So they like rather than us building out a whole design user interface, like we don't want to build a Photoshop, right? We want to use these other tools that already exist,
right? So
Canva just released their developer SDK, or like it's basically an API that we can call that information from other people's accounts. So like now that's like becoming more and more possible. So all of these things are, again, in the next 2 years, you're going to see all of this be capable for every channel that you're working on. It's now just like connecting, all of these different pieces of technology together so that we can actually create these outputs that we're looking for. So
that's great. And it's a newer company, but in tech, that's great. There's so much more to come. I mean, I think it's a year and a half old, right? Is that about right?
Yeah. We officially, I think, started in October of 2022. December of that year, ChatGPT dropped, and I think everybody was like, "How the hell did we do this?" Or specifically with podcasting, so we were positioned pretty well to ride that wave. But like my co-founder had a day job until I think it was like May of this last year, and then at that point it was like, "Oh, this is big enough and this is real enough that we're gonna like go all in on this thing." And start, but so I mean, it's technically about a year and a half, but since we've been focusing on it full time, less than a year.
That's amazing.
But I think a lot of these companies, it's like that, right? It's like it's still super early. So.
Right. I mean, it's the Wild West of all this, right? You go back to the Sora thing. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I'm excited for what So you're so it's the AI that's doing all this, right? And if I had to summarize what you're doing is you're making it easy for the lay people to interact with it. Like it's out there, it's really, really powerful. And now I don't have to learn the language. I just have to learn my language. And you're essentially an interpreter and a repurposer. Totally. I mean, that's it. You're repurposing stuff. Do you have any, like yourself or your clients? I mean, so, my little, so I'm going to make a promise. Let me do this now. I'm going to make a promise that for this episode, I like to do this. I'm going to upload this episode to Swell. And so when you all see stuff about this episode, it's going to be from Swell. So we'll see what it does for me. But I guess my question for you is, I'm a noodler, right? So I like, like what percentage of people are doing this and they're like, great, I'm done. I post it. And what percentage are like, ooh, if I could just tweak off this few seconds and like, are you getting feedback like that from your customers and clients, or how does that all work?
Yeah, I think for like, how I always think about building companies is like take a thing that people are doing and make it cheaper for them, make it easier, make it cheaper. So like for our clients that are like podcast agencies or podcast networks or like marketing departments, we're seeing them be like, yo, we were doing this already. And like now we can do it for a tenth of the cost. So for them, they're way more like, this is a part of our workflow. This is how we're thinking about it. We definitely have those people though that are just like testing all these different things just because like it's a curiosity standpoint they're coming from. I think there's so much out there like that's naturally going to happen. My friend said this the other day. He's like, it's very frothy right now. Like there's so much there and it's like kind of just bubbling up and there's no clear, like lines of where like what's going on or a clear image of what's going on. So yeah, I think that the big thing I would think about, like as the filter, again, I'm just always coming at it from like a business, like a business owner's mindset. Like look for those tools that would take a part of your company, and it's very easy to do the math. Like, oh, this would take us 10 hours to do, and now I can pay this company to do it for us for an hour, for the cost of an hour of our time. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? It's just a resource allocation thing, and that's. Like that's really what this is, right? It's just another tool that's going to be in our tool belt that we're going to be able to deploy as business owners. But I see a lot of people right now that are trying to do like, it's just like a hammer for everything, even though they're not always nails. And like just trying to use AI in every form that they can, rather than just like, oh, here's this thing it's really good at right now. So let's just use it for that thing. as this stuff progresses and gets better, it's going to be way more and more. It's going to get more and more capable in producing, outputs or doing like processes or whatever that is, doing the jobs you're trying to get done. But our philosophy, and it's kind of crass, but it's like, don't go out and do mushrooms in the woods. It's like, wait for the people to come back and like who share with us, hey, we found this and it works. Okay, cool. Well, let's just do that thing and not be kind of spending all of our time like experimenting and discovering all this, because there is just so much going on. That could be a full-time job, right, for a person, just
for sure,
testing new things. So
yeah. So you mentioned agencies. That's a problem. I'm assuming that's the biggest use case for Swell. But like, what industries are using you? What you mentioned podcasts. You mentioned marketing agencies. Like, who should be using Swell? Like, who's the ideal person who's going to get that 10 hours back?
Totally. We see B2B companies have the most success with us.
Really? Okay.
Like D2C, we're not really built for it. It's just a different game. A lot of it is like influencer based, right? So it's like, I'm coordinating, 20 different influencer campaigns and then aggregating all of that content. For B2B, it's a way simpler process, right? Like say you're an expert in, I used to do work in the building materials space.
Okay.
So say you're like, a ton about like manufacturing wood products or whatever, right? So you start a podcast about, where you talk to industry experts about building houses or, any of those topics that are related to you. So like something that we're doing internally is we are doing this show that's like basically interviewing we call them content producers, right? So it's like anybody that's producing content. So it could be like a head of growth or a head of content at a company, or it could be like, the number 2 person behind one of like the most popular podcasts in the US. Any of these people that are kind of like the ones that are taking that raw material and then turning it into like these other things or distributing it, that's who we want to talk to. But for us, so like what the strategy is like, hey, I go talk to these industry experts about what are they doing that's on like the front lines of this process. And then I take that long form video and I then go and I distribute it to my target audience, which of course they want to know what those people are doing, because to them it's education, right? It doesn't even look or feel like marketing. But because I'm the one that's the vehicle that's distributing that to them, we are associated with those ideas, and that creates inbound leads for my company, Swell AI, right? So for B2B companies, that's an easy playbook, right? I just go, I find industry experts, I have them on my show, I get all this knowledge from that. It's also an excuse for me to get into a relationship with my own target customers, because I can be like, hey, John, who works at company X, who I'm trying to get as a client, come on my podcast. Like, we have so many email newsletter subscribers, it gets so many downloads, and this is how many like views we get across social. So you're basically offering them something that is valuable to them, right? It gives you negotiation leverage within that cold reach out that you're doing. They come on the show, you suddenly get their text, their phone number, you're texting each other like, hey, blah, blah, blah. You get in relationship with these people. But also what it does is it creates content for you. You get to have that source content that's then, transformed into all of these different channels you're doing marketing through. But you can also take those clips and you share those with John. And now John suddenly has all of his video content that he can put on his own social media that grows his own personal brand. So all the incentives are really well aligned within that B2B space. And this is how we're seeing B2B companies my friend is in the biotech space. They just started this podcast called the Biotech Startups Podcast. All they do is they interview biotech startups founders, right? But in the last 8 months, it's gone from like non-existent to a top 10 life sciences podcast in the US.
Wow.
He has like, one of the big 5 banks reaching out to him, like being like, hey, we want to sponsor this episode because everybody that listens to your show is our target customer. And so suddenly like that bank is now going to subsidize the cost of producing this media for him. And so his marketing department, if you want to call it that, is basically no longer a cost center. It's actually a revenue center for him. And it's also given him so much leverage within the market where he can reach out to any founder at this point. And he's like, hey, Steven, I want to be in relationship with you. Or, hey, Janet, I want to like meet you. Like, can we set up a call to have that conversation? And he suddenly has that notoriety for that to be possible. So that's what we're seeing happen in this space. And like we're seeing Swell used for that a lot within businesses that aren't, again, like podcast agencies or clips agencies or, podcast networks or, any of these other kind of like large enterprise entities. So
awesome.
But
so that's super interesting. So that it's, the timing of you saying that. So the previous episode to this was all on demand generation, which is really what you're talking about there.
Exactly.
Which is so I'll link to that maybe above or below, I don't know, somewhere to that episode, but check that out. And it's the idea is, and tools like Swell can help you create that demand much more efficiently. But the idea is instead of you cold calling that company that you want to be a Swell customer, you've now created a relationship. You've now created demand for their counterparts at other companies. And it's a soft, slow pitch, but you're a thought leader, right? So you're creating yourself as you're positioning yourself as a thought leader. When people think about I need this help, they're going to think Cody, and that's why it works. So I think it's great.
It also makes more like, so like say your BDR reaches out to them in the future, right? Like if you have a CEO or a director of marketing that's been listening to your show for the last 6 months, right? And they get a cold email from a BDR from your company, they're going to be way more receptive to that because for the last 6 months, every week they've spent an hour with you,
right? And
they know your company exists, right? And so that's the leverage point here as well. It's no longer this cold thing. Like it's not a cold lead anymore that they're having to convince. Like this is a warm lead that already has a relationship with you, even though it's like parasocial and it's like this one-to-many relationship. Like if you're in somebody's ears an hour a week, like that is more than I talk to my mother, right? Which is terrible, but like in reality, that's actually what's going, right? Like, but like that is what's happening, right?
You're right.
Like I have a podcast and I'm talking to these founders on a weekly basis. Like, of course, there's going to be trust that's built on that over and over again. And then when I reach out to them, like, hey, like we have this software that I think is going to save you money and make your company grow faster. Like they're going to be like, hell yeah, I'll jump on a conversation. Of course I'll do a 15-minute call with you. I've been listening to you for 100 hours for the last year. It's a no-brainer for them. And so that again is like to your point with the demand generation piece. It's both creating inbound like demand and yeah, I mean you still have to capture that, but also it makes it easier for your sales teams to then do outbound and do that prospecting. So
you're right. And the added benefit of this conversation, because the hidden surprise for myself when doing this is how cool it is to talk to people that I've never met before. I got an email from you, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. We talked last week. We talked now. We talked for an hour and a half. We'll talk again. Like it's a connection that wouldn't have happened. It came out of nowhere. Maybe we'll work together. Maybe we won't. Doesn't matter. The point is we're getting less and less ways to make those connections, and this is a great one.
Totally.
Great way to do it. So
totally. Yeah. I think about it as like the surface area on the internet you're trying to create, right? Like another way to describe this is like I think about it as like digital gravity. Like I'm trying to make digital mass on the internet so that I have more influence around me in my sphere, whatever that is, whether, for us, it's content marketing. So I'm always just making more, like I go on these shows, I talk to people, write about this, etc. Like I try to be everywhere in this space because for me, that creates more mass, which creates more inbound, which creates more influence, which is this like in the analogy or the way to think about it is like, as I get more mass, I naturally get bigger, right? Because I have I pull more objects towards me, right? And as I get bigger, that makes my company grow. We all, it makes it, that's how you have sustainable growth. So anyways, just how I think about it, like another mental framework to go about it. But I know we're coming up on time.
Yeah, that's good. So when I upload this to Swell, I'm going to be disappointed if it doesn't pull that as a clip. Digital gravity. I love it. I think it's great. So everybody, thank you, Cody, for joining me. This is a great conversation. You guys, I'll say you should check Cody out on LinkedIn. We've been connected for a little while. There's a lot of carousels. Cody's obsessed with them right now. They're great.
It's constant, yeah.
Very interesting. They're working.
Entirely AI generated. Yeah, it's hilarious. We're actually starting to experiment with polls right now. This is a quick growth hack for anybody that's trying to grow their LinkedIn. So call out your target customers. So like marketers, do a controversial statement that all marketers have some opinion on. So like what's the best way to do marketing for a B2B SaaS company? And then have the answers there. So like A, B, C. If you just go to my profile, there will be an example of this.
Right. No, I saw it yesterday or today. Yeah.
But people vote on this. The magic though is that anybody that votes on this, they get a notification a week later that the poll is now done. So they come back to the post and you can add a call to action to the post. That's like, whatever your lead magnet is, or et cetera. And you'll get inbound leads from that. So I learned this from my friend. His name's Andy Newborn. He's like a god on LinkedIn. He's just really he built a company in this space. But he's getting like 50 to 100 signups for his basically it's like a lead magnet building course. And it's just an email news. It's literally just an email, a daily email that happens over 10 days. That's an email course that teaches people how to use this software. And so again, just another leverage point for people that, a very tactical thing that they can do tomorrow really easily.
Amazing. Well, maybe I'll try that out. So other than LinkedIn, well, why don't you tell me where people can find you on LinkedIn, and where else can people find you if they want to connect with you or learn about Swell?
Yeah. So swellai.com. You can find us there. It's free to sign up. You get a upload a month that you can do. And then there's, different levels of subscription based on what you need. And then I'm mainly on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you just Google Cody Schneider, I should come up. If I don't come up, I'm doing my job wrong. So that is the best places to find me. So
okay, awesome. Well, we'll link to everything below. Thank you, Cody. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us, listening to a little bit about Sora, listening about content repurposing as well. And I'll see you all next Friday. Have a good one.
Thank you, Jim.